Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of the National Medal of Honor Heritage Center's webinar series. I am Stephen Thomas, the Director of Operations for the Center. We are joined today by a very exciting guest who is going to bring one of the Medal of Honor stories that you don't hear very often. And we are excited to welcome John Heckerman, the tattooed historian, to the webinar. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate the offer to be here, and it's a great honor to do this.
Well, I don't really have a lot to say of George other than that is an amazing story, and I can't wait to hear more about what you have researched. Because just surface level reading of George, it's already an amazing story, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. But can we get a little bit of background on you before you jump into your presentation?
Yeah, sure. I earned my master's degree in history 10 years ago, and I went on to work alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as an archivist and a historian. I did it on a contractual basis. And while I was doing that, I actually started this project, The Tattooed Historian, from the cubicle of my workspace because I realized sometimes working in archives, a lot of people don't know what you do. And I wanted to make history accessible to a wide range of people. So that's how this whole thing started. And it became a full-time endeavor in 2018. And just like many other businesses, it slogged through the pandemic years. And now I'm looking forward to moving on to earn my PhD starting this fall in Ontario to concentrate on digital humanities. So I'm kind of taking the next step forward.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. I actually did find you during the pandemic, right at the very onset of it. I had found your site and your platforms, and I fell in love with what you're putting out. So I'm really excited to be here with you today and to hear your presentation. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chats, and we'll make sure to get them answered. But John, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. I have a slide presentation on George that I'm really looking forward to showcasing to everyone. This one, you took a little bit of time for me to. It's all right, Stephen. That's fine. Technology is a wonderful thing. Sometimes we hit the wrong button and it's the wrong person up there. It's fine.
Yes, it is. Sorry.
George is a fascinating person, like Stephen was saying, and I'm really looking forward to introducing him to many of you. Maybe some of you have possibly heard about him. You may have looked some things up about him when you heard about this event. It kind of piqued your curiosity. We're going to do a short, like 30-minute dive into George's life. We can't cover everything in detail because really George's existence is a movie waiting to happen, really. And this guy seems to be everywhere. And we're going to see that as we progress through this entire presentation. But again, I'm really looking forward to giving you the insights into George here. And for something a little bit different, I'm used to doing PowerPoint presentations. I used to do it with my class. I actually got the chance to talk and teach at the university level. And I thought, well, let's mix it up and we'll do something a little different. So we're going to try Canva for the first time in presenting.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I like to push the boundary, and I know this is just a little boundary, but I like to move forward and try to do something a little different. So we're going to try Canva, and hopefully it works. So here we have a picture of George in his First World War uniform. George is going to be a member of the 103rd Infantry Regiment, 26th Division AEF. Remember, in the First World War, we don't have infantry division behind the numerical designation. We still have just division. So it'll be 1st Division, 26th Division, 79th Division, etc. So you're going to see that as we go through the presentation. But this is what would be the equivalent of the more modern 26th Infantry Division, like you'll see in the Second World War and beyond. See, technology, wonderful thing. There we go. I hit the wrong button. So why Dilboy? Dilboy story is really interesting for a number of reasons. One, it's an immigration story. And remember that a large part of the American Expeditionary Force are first or second generation Americans. They've just arrived here and now they're being called to serve. Service, obviously, and sacrifice. two things that we talk about a lot when we discuss the Medal of Honor and other things involving conflict and memory. Now, memory is going to be a little bit of a tricky one as we go forward in this story because the story is quite complex for just one person. There's a lot of things going on here, but you'll understand memory when we get to George's uh, uh, death and burial. So we're going to keep memory in mind moving forward. George's story begins actually in Alitsata, which at the time in 1896 and a little bit beyond was a part of Greece, the Kingdom of Greece. Today, it is part of Turkey. And this kind of gives you a little bit of a dose of what's to come between these two areas of the world. It's now called Alitsati, Turkey. His original name is Georgios Dilboy. His homeland of the Kingdom of Greece will be a huge impact on what he does later in life. His teenage years are going to be marked by his homeland and doing things for his homeland, as we will see. So, as we see with a lot of soldiers in the First World War in the Army Expeditionary Force, they still have those strong roots to their homeland if they are first or second generation immigrant. They still identify with the hyphen, which becomes a divisive point for some people, especially nativists. They want to get rid of the hyphen. They don't want Irish American. They want Americans. They don't want Greek Americans, like George would call himself. They want Americans. So we're going to think about that connection with his homeland as we move forward through his early life. Here's a map of where George is from in Alitsata, Greece at the time. Now, as I said, Alitsati, Turkey. And you can see the Aegean Sea there separates mainland Greece from Turkey. So this is going to be, as I say, a very divisive area at this time. And George is going to really rely heavily on his Greek roots to determine his move forward and progress through life itself. It's the immigrant story. It's the story a lot of that we hear about a lot in the AEF and in America at the turn of the 20th century. In 1908, when George is 12, his father Antonios sets off for America. The interesting thing about going through George's story is a lot isn't spoken about when it comes to his mother. His mother isn't around in the records, and that's not to say that she left George behind or left him with family or anything like that. She possibly died during childbirth. I'm not sure of what happened to her, but it's always George and his father consistently through all this. George joins his father at the age of 14 in 1910 in America. And this small little family unit, two people, father and son, take up residency in Somerville, Massachusetts. So they are going to be a huge part of the story in Massachusetts in the years to come. But again, this is a story that resonates throughout the entire AEF. We hear a lot about this, immigrants coming to America and immediately or shortly thereafter getting into the military to try to prove that they want to be part of the American experience. But what happens back in Dilboy's homeland really rocks his world. Basically, war erupts back home, the First Balkan War. And the Balkans play a huge part in the eruption of the First World War. But there is a lot of fighting and infighting and cultural differences and these peoples trying to separate from one another based on culture, religion, land, who is going to have control of what. The First Balkan War erupts. And as I say on this slide, it is a war where kingdoms of Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Montenegro, also known as the Balkan League, fight against the Ottoman Empire. In this era, around 1912, the Ottoman Empire is slowly starting to decline. It has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the Ottoman Empire is starting to lose its grip on power, especially in the Balkan region. And the First Balkan War really showcases this downfall that we're going to see clear into the 1920s. So about 10 years of downfall in a very hard way for the Ottoman Empire begins with this first Balkan War. And you can see on the map where we have Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, obviously, as well. And you can see the Ottoman Empire being squeezed. And so you're going to have this first Balkan War set out to try to grab more land from the Ottoman Empire as they slowly start to decline. George goes back home because he believes that is his duty. He is to go back home. He is seeing himself as being Greek first, and he decides it's time to go home and fight. And he joins the Hellenic military. This is also known as the Army of Thessaly. This is a group of men who are commanded by Crown Prince Constantine, who will become Constantine the First. He's one of about 100,000 within this army. This is a huge fight. This is a huge war for this small region. There are going to be about 150,000 losses on all sides combined in this war. So this is a pretty massive undertaking and something that we don't pay attention to much in the Western world, if you will. In the United States, we don't think about the Balkan Wars too much until we have the Balkan crisis in 1914. But there's a lot of give and take in the Balkans at this time. George will survive some of the most major engagements that the Greek military goes through during this time, as I've listed here, including the battles of Toporo, Sorobich, and Yagicha. So he is very heavily involved. And as far as I can tell, he was never wounded in battle. So he survived some pretty intense fighting. And he will use this as a lesson in his life. Now, remember, George is very young at this time. He's just a young teenager when he is fighting in this war. So this is starting to mold him into the person that he will become later in life. We are molded by our environment, and George will be molded by these activities, not only trying to get back with his father in Massachusetts, but going back to his home to fight in this war. Well, Bulgaria is not satisfied with what they get in the First Balkan War, and so it attacks its former allies, Serbia and Greece, in 1913. Romania and Montenegro join in the fight, and Dilboy finds himself once again involved in a conflict. The Second Balkan War erupts. And believe me, these slides are just a little needle in the haystack of the history of the Balkan Wars. This is something that you would really want to dive into to understand what is going on in this region and how it will affect things in 1914 as we move forward. The war only lasts till August 10th of the year, so from June until August. And it causes even more casualties between all the belligerents. It is a major undertaking, and one that will define what happens in the Balkans for a couple years to come. And remember, August 1913, this is only 1 year before we see the beginning of the First World War in July and August of 1914. But George returns to America, and he is reunited with his father in Massachusetts. He decides that he wants to get his education. He finds employment in the area. Some sources say that he got into shoe repair. So he found a cobbler shop and learned how to work on shoes while he went to school. But his time in Massachusetts and Somerville is short-lived because he returns to a time when America is also thinking about its own defense. Conflict is brewing on the southern border. The Mexican Revolutionary Forces under Pancho Villa raided Columbus, New Mexico in March of 1916. And with that comes this idea of securing the border. And the United States Army will send National Guard troops down to the border to try and make sure that this does not happen again. There is no other incursion by Mexican Revolutionary Forces into the United States. And George answers the call for volunteers. He decides he's going back in. He already has all this experience in the Balkan Wars. Well, now he can put that experience to good use to prove that he wants to be part of the American experience now, and also to ensure that he has a place here for himself and his father, maybe securing a decent life in the new world, if you will, for he and his father. So Dilboy joins the New Hampshire National Guard on June 19th, 1916. So he only sees peace, if you will, out of uniform for a couple years before he decides to travel to Keene, New Hampshire. He joins Company H, 1st New Hampshire Infantry Regiment, and they are sent to Laredo, Texas. They're going to keep that area secure, and they are going to make sure that they never have that incursion of those Mexican revolutionary forces. A lot of men that you will see in the AEF, in the early days of the AEF, really got their training and cut their teeth on the border. And this is one particular instance, because these National Guard troops, as we will see, will be the first ones called up in the Great War when we go into that conflict. So George is again getting his military service to try to prove something else now. He just proved previously that he was Greek. Now he's trying to prove that he also wants to be part of the American experience. Classic immigrant story at this time. In April of 1917, a lot of us know what happens, but the border crisis is starting to settle down. And Dilboy is honorably discharged from the National Guard in February. So it's only about a year, less than a year, that he is in the National Guard. February 1917, he's discharged. But 2 months later, America goes to war and declares war on Germany and enters the First World War, Germany and her allies. Enters the First World War in April of 1917. George immediately enlists. He decides he's going to war. He's going to prove himself once again, to prove that he's meant to be here. He has a sense of duty. And he becomes part of the 103rd Infantry Regiment, 26th Division of the Army Expeditionary Force. So the old New Hampshire Guard unit gets incorporated into this infantry regiment. And this infantry regiment has men from Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts within its ranks. So these National Guardsmen who were once working together under the auspices of their state are now being put under control of the federal force. The 26th Division arrives in France in September of 1917 after a little bit of training. And I say a little bit because sometimes with the later units, they barely get any training. But the 26 already has National Guard members in them, so they are trained previously. When they get to Europe, though, they have to be trained differently, because we're not trained in trench warfare just yet in the U.S. Army, and therefore we have to be trained by people who have already been there. And officers of the French Army will come in to the 103rd, to the entire 26th Division, and they will prepare these men, including Dilboy, for what we see on the Western Front, as we see in that image. We're going to look at trench warfare now. The 26th is put on the line in early 1918. And I want to underscore this about the AEF experience in the First World War. It's not going to be like the British or the French experience in the First World War as far as trench warfare is concerned. Our army is going to be there for a certain amount of time, a short amount of time compared to a lot of others. But it's only in these early days of our United States Army being on the Western Front that you will see trench warfare, or them taking up trenches. A lot of the things we're going to see later, including the advance that Dilboy is going to take part of, is open field warfare. And we have to consider that when we look at the American experience. We're not going to be languishing in trenches for 2 years or 3 years, as other allies have. This is going to turn into a lot of open field warfare, and George is going to experience that firsthand along with his comrades. It's the summer of 1918, the last summer of the war. The Germans have done some spring offensives this year, and they have been somewhat successful, but a lot of them have been turned back. It's, again, going back into this stalemate. And the 26th Division is placed under the command of the French 6th Army. The French 6th Army will be on their right flank, but they are placed under the command of the Army General Jean de Gut. And these French soldiers have been there and done that, as we would say. They are very hardened troops and veteran troops. They've been there a while. They are protecting their homeland, and they are willing to go to various lengths to make sure they drive out the invader. They are located in the Marne salient, the Ain Marne salient. And this salient has been basically a thorn in the side of the Allies for some time. And they want a general push through this area up the spine of the Marne to make sure that they can keep this area safe and secure and maybe break the will of the Germans in that area. This is the first experience of large-scale offensive action on the Western Front that Dilboy and the rest of the 26th are going to experience. There have been earlier times where the 26th was caught up in trench raids by the Germans and others, but this is going to be the first full-scale push for the 26th, as we will see. And this is where it occurs. This is the town that Dilboy is around, Bourget, France. And it is going to be a really important town. Why? There is a railroad line going through town, and this railroad line connects Chateau Thierry to Paris. Chateau Thierry is a big deal in the U.S. Army history. This is on the rail line from Paris to Chateau Thierry. This is also on the rail line to Belleau. When we hear about Belleau Wood, this is on the rail line. And Bourget is so very important to the cause of breaking this line of Germans because of that rail line and others. And we're going to see that play out. This particular shot was taken in the summer of 1918, right before the main attack through this particular area. And as we see, aerial photography is starting to have its heyday in the First World War, if you will. And we have this down to a science. And this is the way that Dilboy's commanders are going to try to study the battlefield before they go in on July 18th of 1918. It's 9:30 a.m. and the goal is to capture the rail station in Bourget. Dilboy's company is told, this is your objective. You will capture the rail line. We're going to make sure that we take this rail out of German hands, take the railroad station, and we can advance from there. So it's basically a leapfrog attack. Here's your first objective, and then we'll find out the next objective once we get there. George follows orders to the letters, just like his comrades around him. And they went to their platoon commander to look for enemy defenses ahead of the next attack. Pardon me. So George and his comrades have already captured the rail station by 9:30. They're looking for what's ahead, and they're going to scout out what is ahead. And while on this mission, George and his platoon discover a German machine gun position about 300 yards away from where they are. They're near this rail line, and Dilboy and his men are basically caught out in the open for a few seconds. And Dilboy decides to fire on the German machine gun to protect his comrades around him as they take cover. He's basically doing his own kind of rear line action while people are retreating to different areas of cover. He's holding out to make sure they get there. His efforts were having very little effect. And George, with bayonet fixed, starts to charge towards the German machine gun. But German machine gun rounds start to find their mark, including a very terrible wound on George's right leg, which nearly severs his leg above the knee. So you can imagine he's going through insurmountable pain, uncontrollable pain, and he's bleeding out. In spite of this, he's only about 25 yards away from the German machine gun position, and George decides he's going to keep firing his rifle, which with the 26th Division is probably a model 1903 Springfield 30-06 rifle, a very powerful weapon and a great weapon, bolt action. And George is going to keep firing and recharging that bolt and keep firing on these German troops. He kills 2 in the machine gun and around the machine gun area, and basically breaks the will of the others within that machine gun location. But Dilboy doesn't survive his wounds. George is out in the middle, excuse me, out in the middle of this railroad embankment. He's down on the ground, prone, because he is mortally wounded. And by the time his comrades get to him, George is already gone. He's bled out. He has taken multiple rounds to the trunk of his body as well, and he has already passed away. So his short life has been snuffed out on the Western Front, trying to help his friends seek cover and shelter and make sure they survive. I found his burial record, and this is his burial card, if you will. And you can see under date of, or beside date of burial, place of burial, he is buried right basically where he fell in Borishez. This is typical of what we will see on the Western Front as far as casualties killed in action are concerned. They will be buried close by to where they were when they fell. He's buried alongside some other comrades who may have fallen in the area, and they are denoted on these cards so they can be found later. So there's a grave number and a location. We also see that he is moved later on. He's moved from Borishez into the American Cemetery at Belleau, which when you look on a map, he doesn't fall too far from where that cemetery is. So if you ever visit, you're not too far from where George gave his life for his comrades. You can also see the emergency address is his father in Alitsata. He's back in Greece. He left the United States and went back to Greece. So this is an interesting tidbit that's going to come into play here as we move forward. So it is very typical for these men to be moved one or two times as far as their grave is concerned. Here is his Medal of Honor citation. After his platoon had gained its objective along a railroad embankment, Private First Class Dilboy, accompanying his platoon leader to reconnoiter the ground beyond, was suddenly fired upon by an enemy machine gun from 100 yards. From a standing position on the railroad track, fully exposed to view, he opened fire at once, but failing to silence the gun, rushed forward with his bayonet fixed through a wheat field toward the gun emplacement, falling within 25 yards of the gun with his right leg nearly severed above the knee and with several bullet holes in his body. With undaunted courage, he continued to fire into the emplacement from a prone position, killing 2 of the enemy and dispersing the rest of the crew. Antonios comes back to the United States because in 1919, he receives his son's Medal of Honor on Boston Common. Among the officers who are there and the citizens of Boston was Governor Calvin Coolidge, pictured here. He's governor of Massachusetts at the time. He'll come back into our story very shortly. He's going to have his own part in the story of George Dilboy. Although Antonius was very proud of what his son had done for his new homeland, he's not satisfied that George is buried in the National Cemetery, or what would become the National Cemetery. Antonios requests that George be taken back home to Alitsata. Remember, Antonios is back there now, and he wants his son to be buried in his homeland, in his hometown. And after gaining permission, the body was taken back to Greece. And we have the removal project information here from the card of disinterment. So he's disinterred, in April of 1922. He is sent to the Paris morgue and then is sent on 15 days later to Greece. And the interesting part is, with this whole story, for this particular part of it, he arrives in Greece on July 4th, 1922. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit, because he's died for the land that he now had called home. And his body returns to Greece and arrives on July 4th, 1922. His body is taken through the town in a American flag covered casket. And it is said that a crowd of 17,000 from the town and the local populace, the local area around town, 17,000 people came out to witness the funeral procession in Alitsata. So he is very well known and remembered in that town at this time. Dilboy's remains has an interesting story, and this is where Dilboy's story gets a little bit dark. The Greco-Turkish War is going on, 1919 to 1923. Again, this is an outcropping of the old Balkan War days. And as the Ottoman Empire is falling, they're trying to grasp control of these different areas that they once had control of. They're trying to hold on to it. And the Greco-Turkish War breaks out. Turkish soldiers entered Alitsata. And during the conflict, they found Dilboy's remains in the Greek Orthodox Church. His skeletal remains were strewn about the church by the Turks. And the church itself was completely ransacked. So we have someone who was awarded the Medal of Honor, and his body has been desecrated by foreign troops. You can imagine what the outburst was from this. President Warren Harding is completely outraged that this happened to an American soldier, and especially one who has earned the Medal of Honor. He demands an apology from Turkey, which he will later receive. He also demands the removal of Dilboy's body from Alitsata. He wants it out of this war-torn region immediately. He does not want this to keep occurring. And the USS Litchfield is tasked with recovering those remains. The Litchfield, as you see here pictured in the bottom right of the screen, has been in the region for some time. They've been working on a humanitarian crisis that's been going on during the Greco-Turkish conflict. They've been helping Greek and Armenian refugees get out of there. And now they are going to help Dilboy, his body, get out of that area as well. His body is given, his skeletal remains, I should say, is given over to the Americans by a Turkish honor guard. They're trying to patch up those wounds before they really anger the Americans and the American government. So they give this honor guard the permission to send Dilboy's, or to take Dilboy's remains to the Litchfield at the docks. And on November 12th, 1923, Dilboy is buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full honors, a place that is safe for his remains finally. And the United States government, the U.S. Army, and others are very delighted that his body will now be safe and lie within the boundaries of the United States. President Calvin Coolidge presided over the funeral. He was the governor at Boston Common. He is now president. And you can see here on his burial file that he is reburied on November 12th, 1923, the day after the 5-year anniversary of the last guns going silent on the Western Front. His grave number is 4574. You can visit it to this day. An interesting part of Dilboy's story on top of this, his story touches 3 separate presidents. When you think about this, Wilson signed off on his Medal of Honor, and we go all the way to Coolidge presiding over his funeral. This is his gravestone in Arlington Cemetery today. You can visit it, and it is one of those that sometimes is overlooked because we don't often think about George Dilboy when we think about those who were earning the Medal of Honor during the First World War. We often think about Alvin York and others. Dilboy didn't get a movie, and Dilboy's life is definitely a movie waiting to happen. But he lies in peace in Arlington Cemetery today, and it is a great honor for his family. I know Antonios was finally happy that his son was buried peacefully, and his body would lie there for eternity. So George's story is one of immigration, sacrifice, one of service to multiple countries, not only his homeland, but his new land, and one of memory. And I hope that this story, this small nugget of this very large story, piques your interest to look into Dilboy more, because I think there is a larger story here to be told in a grander form than my 30-minute presentation. But George is one that we must remember for a very long time.
Wow. That is an amazing story. I mean, because again, like you said, it spans over many different aspects. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about here at the Heritage Center, is that the Medal of Honor gives us the platform to talk about a myriad of different topics within, and memory is a big one. How these individuals are remembered, and how we work to continue those stories moving forward.
Mhm.
It's great. I mean, great presentation. That was
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank
We have some questions that are starting to come in.
you.
It looks like Fred Ferry asked, "Did Dilboy's father agree to bring him back to the U.S.? Was his father involved in that process, and how much so, if we know?"
What I have found is Dilboy's father is not heavily involved in that process because of the fact that this is turning into more of a political international incident. And so those in the reins of power are basically saying we need to move on this now. While we have this humanitarian crisis, we also need to ensure that this Medal of Honor earner is properly buried in peace. So I don't think his father Antonios has a lot to do with his reburial, but there are reports that his family was very satisfied that his remains were properly buried with military honors and were kept in a very safe place. But that's a great question, and one that it does not seem like Antonios has a lot of. His fingers aren't involved in that a lot. This is more political, international.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I mean, at that point, I think any father would want their child's
Mhm.
remains, removed as quickly as possible. So I'm sure he, I'm again just assuming because we don't know for sure, but
Sure.
I can only assume that he wanted to get his son out of there. That
Mhm.
way, his remains are kept safe,
Mhm.
for sure.
Right.
Looks like next question. I had assumed Dilboy would have been unprepared for trench warfare, but it seems that his previous experience was essential during his action. Was combat in the earlier Balkan Wars primarily urban? Uh,
Mhm.
was there early trench warfare used in the Balkans, foreshadowing the style of combat utilized during coming in the Great War?
That's a fantastic question. We see a mix. We see an early kind of trench warfare. Trench warfare had been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We just never called it that. But we have both in both Balkan wars. There's a lot of hit and run fighting, like you would see in the 19th century, and then there's a lot of stagnant fighting in entrenched positions as well. It is nowhere near what we'll see on the Western Front, but it is kind of like that, as you say. It's kind of like that experimenting and getting used to that kind of fighting, at least in a small way. And I think that really had an effect on Dilboy. I mean, I can't speak for him, but I think that really would have had an effect on his training, and he would have had that prior experience of knowing what it's like to be shot at, knowing what it's like to take cover, knowing what it's like to help his comrades around him. But I do. There is trench warfare, but not like we would see on the Western Front, obviously. But a lot of urban fighting, and remember, he's going through Borges and other areas. That's small scale urban fighting.
Right.
So he's pretty much he's got a great grasp of what he's going to be going through when he sees these places on the Western Front. But no one has ever seen anything like the Western Front, and I think that that was basically his training ground for what was to come in 1918.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating to think about, him being in the first two Balkan wars, to have that exposure to combat.
Mhm.
Obviously, he is a great candidate. Why was he only a PFC? Why did he never Why is it that he was it because he was Greek? Was it
Mhm.
because that, there was still that element of racism within or nativism within the United States military that he
Mhm.
wouldn't have gained a higher rank?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've pondered while I was researching this as well. I found that they would ask him to dance for them, like they said, dance like Greeks do. And I'm wondering if it's that nativist idea of like, hey, look at this funny guy doing this dance, because that's what they meant. And I'm wondering if that kind of, like you say, Stephen, really impacted his rise or lack thereof in rank in the United States Army, because this guy's been on the border already, and we see a lot of these men who have been on the border are already sergeants by the time they get to the Western Front, or they're lieutenants. They have that training, and this guy's already been through the 2 Balkan Wars. So it's kind of interesting to wonder, why is this? Do they not trust him because he's fought in the Balkans? Because like he's seen as something that he's not? I'm not sure, but it is a great question as well. Why didn't this guy get a higher rank? Uh, I have no idea, and we could speculate on that for a very long time. But
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure
maybe
we could.
someone can do the research in greater detail in the future that uncovers that one document that I didn't uncover, and it's like, okay, this is sitting in an archive for 100 years, and we had no idea.
Right. Yeah. And I mean that I hope that someone that will eventually watch this and take that on as a
Mhm.
project. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, yes.
We actually have another question. It's a little more about you. Why the tattooed historian?
The tattooed historian. There are multiple reasons for that. One, I'm heavily tattooed. I have about 30 or so. They're historical, which really made me stand out from some of my friends when we did like World War II interpretation or something like that. I had World War II tattoos. But one of the reasons was because I have been denied employment due to having tattoos below my elbows, and it was in the history field 15 years ago or 10 years ago. And I always thought, my tattoos aren't my resume. My tattoos are just a way to express myself, but they're not my resume. They're not my CV. And I wanted to create a safe space for people who look different or act differently than others, to have a place to come where they can have accessibility to history, or come on and do presentations on my uh, uh, sites, etc. So it was all about accessibility, and also, there is that kind of like little chip on your shoulder where like, I'll show you if I have tattoos and I can do good history. And I love bringing other people on who are like that as well, who are we're the I don't know, we're the bad toys of the history field, I guess.
I
So
guess so. Yeah.
so I like to do that and make it a positive instead of a negative. I love to embrace people for who they are, and I think that really emulated in my thing. And I'm so glad when I chose it that no one had that, because I'm like, this someone's got to have this, and no one
Right.
did.
And it's surprising to me too, because but again, you kind of alluded to it that the history field didn't always uh, like to hire people with
Right,
tattoos.
right.
Uh, Next question we got: do we know the background makeup of the other soldiers in his units? They go on to say, "I'm aware
Mm.
that some units are put together based on their shared backgrounds."
That's a great question. These men were all from the local region. So we're talking about Maine, New Hampshire, and upper north of Boston, upper Massachusetts region in the 103rd. I don't have the exact makeup of his uh, comrades, like in his platoon or anything like that. I didn't dive into that, but surely there are a lot of gentlemen in there who are first or second generation immigrant. They have little or no military training other than the National Guard training, but they're all white men, because this is still a segregated army, and
Mhm.
they are from that particular region of New England. And when you go to that region of the United States, you can really see who was there in the early 20th century and get a feel for what this unit may have looked like. But I don't have, for this particular presentation, I don't have the background of his comrades on hand. So that's something I would love for someone to dive deeper into as well. And I'm sure there are unit histories
Right.
for things like the 103rd or the 26th division that would give you a better scope of at least the last names, and we can
Yeah.
connect the last names to culture or background.
Yep. Yep. Now, personal question is from
Mhm.
me, or not personal, but a question from me personally.
Right.
Is Dilboy remembered in Greece today, and if so, how? Like, how does you
Mm.
know does the country itself acknowledge that they have citizens that immigrated to the United States
Mhm.
and receive the Medal of Honor? Are they
Mhm.
aware of it?
That's a great question because now, obviously, this is an area of Turkey where he's from,
Hmm.
and he's not remembered in that region because the Turks don't want to remember the Greco-Turkish War the way that we would want to from memory. And this goes back to that issue of memory, right, Stephen?
Yep.
Uh, he is remembered in Greek American circles.
Okay.
You have a lot of Greek American organizations who uh, want to understand their past and why their ancestors came here. Dilboy is remembered in that. Dilboy is heavily remembered in Massachusetts. You go to Somerville and other places around that town, and you will find like Dilboy Field or something to that effect, where there are other things that have been named after Dilboy. So he's actually more remembered in Massachusetts and in New England than he is in his hometown because of that geopolitical shift
Right.
in the last 100 and so years. But if anyone is from the Massachusetts area and you go to Somerville and the region around there, you will find things named after Dilboy. But a lot of the Greek American organizations still remember him. And I found some information out about him online uh, as I was just doing some secondary information, not primary source, but secondary. They have him listed on a lot of the sites as being
Oh,
an honorary member or someone that they honor and appreciate from their First World War listings and stuff like
yeah.
that.
Now, do we know if Dilboy's father, if Antonios had what did he do with the remainder of his life after his son finally was buried here in the United States?
After his burial, I don't have much information on Antonios. I don't know what happened with him. He had moved back to Greece and right there during the Greco-Turkish War, and that's why he asked for his son back. But I would love to know what happened to him after his son is buried in Arlington. Did Antonios come back, or did he just go across the Aegean to mainland Greece? It seems like the story is all about George, and rightfully so. There's
Mm-hmm.
a fascinating story here. But again, we're missing his mother. And then after his burial in Arlington, we're missing his father. And it kind of just drops off. So I think that whole family dynamic would be a really interesting thesis or
Right.
a dissertation
Um,
project.
it's a pretty interesting look into the immigration story
Mhm,
in general, right?
mhm.
Just
Right,
because there aren't that many records on these early immigrants, then it's hard to track them,
right.
right? It's hard to find them,
Mhm,
and I hope again that this is something that someone along the line picks up and continues forward. But
mhm.
John, I got to say, you have done an amazing job, kind of helping keep that memory of
Thank
George alive, just in this short webinar. Like, I mean,
thank
I think that people that watch this are going to feel like they want to learn more about him. Like I'm almost to the point where I'm ready to hop off here and start looking up for his father and his
Yeah,
mom, see if we can't
yeah.
find them, because that those are important pieces to his story as well.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
well, I want to give you the opportunity to plug anything you might have coming up. Do you have any other talks coming up or lectures that you have going on?
Thank you for that. I just want to plug that I'm basically on every social media platform. So if you look up the Tattooed Historian, you'll be sure to find me. I have the Tattooed Historian Show, which is a podcast, comes out weekly. I will be speaking in a digital sense for the Yonkers Public Library next month. I'm actually gonna be talking about virtual reality and the history field and how we connect with virtual reality and our idea of memory. I'm a big proponent of historical memory, how it changes with the generations, and so I'll be doing that. But I definitely want to give a shout out to my future university, Brock University, because they have a tremendous interdisciplinary humanities program, and they allow students such as myself and others to really embrace this kind of thing. We're going to be using technology in new and dynamic ways, but with my background, I'm really heavily invested in getting history to everyone out there who wants to listen, and I love to just pique your curiosity and then let you go and run with it. Like Stephen, like you said, after you're done, you're even thinking about finding out what happened to his parents. I love doing that. I love kind of like teasing people with history and being like, here's this, but you need to find out this, because I don't know everything and I will never know everything. I hate the term expert on anything. I think we're forever students, and I love to have people on who can talk about things better than I can, and just be like the funnel for the information for all of you. So if you're into history for all, accessibility of the narrative, a space with no hate allowed, that's basically me. And I really enjoy bringing the immigrant stories such as Dilboy to life. And I love talking about these kinds of ideas of memory and how we remember the fallen, how we remember an event, and putting that into a technological sense is my path forward. So matching tech with memory is my thing now, and
it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, something I'm really looking forward to. And once again, Stephen, I really thank you for this opportunity, because a story such as this one needs to be told more. Like I said, George didn't get a movie, and George's story is movie worthy, let me tell you.
Well, and it's actions like Alvin York, he got a movie, but then that also should have, like you said, been the seed to plant. How many other stories are like that out there?
Right.
How many more can we make accessible to the public, to people to understand that, this is not just some far off land that this happened in. I mean, these are people that are being affected right next door by something that is happening across the world. So yeah, I think what you're doing is wonderful. Again, go follow John at the Tattooed Historian at all social media platforms. You will not be disappointed. His podcasts are wonderful. Keep those going for sure. And I hope that in the future we can definitely bring you back on to explore more memory as it relates to the Medal of Honor. For everybody else, keep an eye on our social media for our next upcoming webinar, which is going to be with Commander Eileen Collins, who is the first female space shuttle commander in U.S. history. So she will be on next month, and I hope to get more details out to everyone as soon as they are made available to me, or as soon as I figure them out, I guess is the better way of putting it. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you all enjoyed. This can be seen on all of our social media platforms as well. John, thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. I hope you had fun with as long as we did. Take care, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.